Hello and welcome back to Expleo Explores. This series zooms in on the 9 success factors for mastering business transformation, and these were identified through data gathered from over 1,000 senior decision makers in Expleo's annual Business Transformation Index report. Welcome to episode 2. In each episode, we'll welcome an esteemed and experienced guest to talk in depth about a success factor. Today's success factor is all about greater board level support for IT strategies and innovations. This is a long-standing challenge for IT departments. And today, what we want to figure out is, how has the role of the CIO evolved? Why is it important to befriend the board? And ultimately, how do you achieve greater board level support for your IT strategies and innovations? We hope you enjoy. Fin Goulding has consistently been named as one of the top global CTOs or CIOs year on year, who in the past 5 years has transformed into a business agility expert, having worked as a senior executive for organizations like Visa, RBS, NatWest, HSBC, Aviva, and also on the digital startup side of things for companies like lastminute.com, travelocity.com and paddypower.com. Fin now advises CXOs around the world and founded Enterprise Flow in order to help leaders and executives to adopt new ways of working and remodel their businesses to deliver successful business transformation. In addition to being on a number of boards, Fin is also a fellow of the British Computer Society and the Irish Computer Society, plus the author of 3 successful books, including Flow, which he co-authored, 12 Steps to Flow and The Transformation Sprint. These days, Fin is enjoying the freedom that remote working has afforded him, spending much of his time working from new and interesting places throughout the year. I think one of the most interesting aspects that Fin will bring today to this discussion is his voyage from the IT department to the wider business. He really believes in freeing workers from the traditional red tape scenarios and moving them into positions of empowerment and autonomy. So, Fin, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you to the podcast today. Before we dive into today's success factor, I have to ask you about your career. What a career it has been. You've held many CIO positions, as I've outlined in the intro. And first off, I want to know, how was that journey for you? And also, how do you think the role of the CIO has transformed over the last 15 years?
Well, it's great listening to that introduction. So thank you. And I'm really happy to be here. I think I got into a senior management role in IT because back in the day, there was no such thing as actually being able to stay technical. You had to sort of move into a management layer. And I'm kind of glad I did. And what I'm seeing now is that the CIO role particularly has got kind of 2 sides to it. One is it kind of is more towards infrastructure and hardware and stuff like that. And another piece is moving much more towards product and the technology and application development. And what businesses are looking for is somebody that understands not just the nuts and bolts of technology, but actually their business and become a partner, in conversations and to move the business forward.
I suppose our research in the Business Transformation Index and the motivation for the title of this podcast, it showed that 84% of respondents to the survey said that the IT innovations and strategies that they had were now more likely to be endorsed at board level. Do you think that this is a repercussion or a consequence of COVID, or is it something here to stay? And does it marry up to what you're seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, in fact, I've been talking to a lot of CIOs recently, part of a group that I'm part of, and we kind of call it the COVID halo, where the IT department was called upon to deliver remote working and to find a way of making that people can be connected and did it successfully. Some companies already had it in play, but others had to go from scratch. And this proved that you could keep your business moving, the business was happy, and now understanding that they ought to invest, because a lot of companies that didn't actually respond quickly had underinvested in technology, and it became very clear that purchasing departments and budgets were constraining actual investment in what IT can provide to the organization.
Yeah, I like that, the halo effect. And you definitely think that it's something that's here to stay. I asked this because in the research we did year on year, we actually saw an increase from 73% saying that board level support had increased to 84%. So obviously whatever happened in the first year of the pandemic spurred businesses on to, nearly go after it even more aggressively in the second year.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as it has become more prevalent, but it could easily slip away, and it could slip away if there isn't a value given for what can be done with investment. But you do find that when times are hard, organizations do cut into the IT budget, and I think they're realizing that that's a bad idea because, they got caught severely in the pandemic. And so therefore, keeping your investment levels high ensures that you'll be ready to respond to the next great event or to take a company to another level.
Of course. And you've definitely experienced, I suppose, the extreme side of having endorsement for radical IT approaches. I know from your past, you were working in a company and you were releasing 50 times a day. What was different about this organization that you were able to achieve that when, you hear of some pillar banks that only release twice a year?
I think it's the fact that the leadership team were willing to back my idea of increasing agility and transforming the platforms. And I guess people call it digital transformation today, but back then it was really, we're going too slow. We need to get to market faster. We actually need to be able to deliver on the promise for our customers. And in fact, it was tough at first. I mean, there were a few rocks along the way. And just keeping a steady position was important. But once we started to increase the cadence of delivery, that really did bring in much more revenue. Therefore, there was more and more desire to go faster and faster and faster. In fact, those releases were incremental. So they weren't like massive releases, they were small ones. But that's the whole point of this, is that these big releases twice a year are kind of dangerous and can be quite catastrophic if you're not careful. So smaller releases were much more important as well for the business.
It makes perfect sense when you really think about it. And I think that's why Agile is just, it's been taken a lot more seriously. You can definitely see that move over the last number of years, and particularly during COVID when people had to really think on their feet and the spotlight was shone on all companies. I suppose, how equipped were they to manage something so radical so quickly?
I would say, if you could I could actually add to that, which is that an organization saw how quickly the technology teams could respond to a COVID situation. Therefore, it gave the senior leaders the platform to be able to say, look, we can actually do some of these other things if we are allowed to transform our platforms or transform our ways of working. And so there's a little bit more credibility given now to senior technology leaders that they were missing before. And so it's becoming clearer that there was a lot of underinvestment in the past.
And why do you think it took a pandemic for us to, I suppose, for businesses to realize that?
When you look at technology on the whole, it's a large cost. And I think technology leaders haven't been able to articulate the benefit that they actually provide until it's not there. I mean, once you're in a situation where it's kind of black and white, where we're all working at home, we can't come to the office, what are we going to do? And it wasn't just getting laptops out to people, but an awful lot of infrastructure and telecommunications. And in fact, it was done so rapidly, it was quite a surprise in a lot of organizations. And so therefore, if you can say, look, we've got these other issues, which are other burning platforms or burning issues, if we don't fix those now, they're going to come back and bite us, if we're in a dangerous situation.
And I suppose sticking with the theme for this podcast today, coming back to the boards, how important do you think it is for there to be an IT representative on the board of a company?
I think if you talk to IT leaders, they say it's very important. In fact, it's something that CIOs and CTOs have been clamoring for years and years. And in fact, probably go back 15 years ago where people were asking, why aren't there more IT representation on the board? And it's only just recently that they're starting to see much more representation, because you need to talk to the person that's going to be driving technological change or transformation at that level. And if you're getting this information from further down the organization, it gets kind of watered down a little bit. So you're seeing much more of that ability, if you can prove yourself, to sit at that table to show what you're worth and what your team is worth. And we're seeing the same thing actually from a security point of view as well. So boards want to have access to the chief security people, because that is also something that they're majorly concerned about.
Of course, yeah, and that's been exemplified a number of times, I suppose, over the last year or so. So I wanted to talk to you, sticking with, the idea of boards. There was a report issued by PwC last year, and it was the annual corporate directors survey. And what came out of that was that 47% of those surveyed thought that a fellow director should be replaced. And 18% then actually thought that two of their fellow directors should be replaced. Is there a problem with transformative leadership at board level, in your opinion?
I would start this by saying this has nothing to do with the boards that I'm on, so I'm not criticizing.
Of course.
However, I mean, unfortunately, in the past, the board members were there really as senior people that could give you advice and guidance and perhaps guide you towards good business outcomes. But board members today have to be much more in touch with the business itself, much more in touch with technology, much more in touch with transformation and things perhaps that they have no skills in whatsoever. I had to teach one board what agile meant. They had no clue whatsoever about transforming the skills of a department. They only see the end of the result, which is if they get reports why staff are unhappy or the business is actually losing money. They can't sometimes put these things together. And unfortunately, some board members do hang around for a long time, and I can make them a little bit blasé, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that like the average time that board members spend on a board is around 8 years, which does seem like an awful long time, for organizations that, as you said previously, they should be spending half of their time focusing on what's in front of them now, and then half their time focusing on, where they want to get to and what that organization will look like in the future.
I think the same goes for executive management teams as well, but particularly with boards, they're very male dominated. And that's an issue, I think, which has been shown in some studies, that if the female diversity in that group is greater than 51% on a board, they're more successful. Those companies are much more successful. And I think that's because of the ways of thinking. There's a more broad approach. There's more challenge that goes on. What happens with very male-dominated boards is they become collegiate, and they actually start to they agree with each other, and they're not so challenging. So we're seeing that a lot more, that change coming in, but it takes an active kind of approach from an organization to say, look, we need to change the diversity of our board because it's just too stale.
Absolutely. And as a proud member of our gender balance ERG, that's music to my ears.
And actually, the 50s, I'm going to say the 51%, of boards that have higher representation of women it really is a study that's out there. It's not that I'm making it up or whatever. I mean, it's something that's actually true. And some people find it hard to believe, but there you go.
Absolutely. It really does impact the bottom line, and you can see that big organizations have really cottoned on to that in the decisions they've made over leadership and board members over the last number of years. Interesting your point about, diversity. And I suppose even if you bring that to like diversity of thought, recently I've been reading a lot about this idea of constructive conflict. And is that something that you've come across, I suppose, in your experience when you're dealing with board levels? Are they starting to encourage each other to, smash down the echo chamber and criticize each other constructively?
Not so much. I mean, I see that much more in organizations which are newer, shall we say, maybe post-startup, just recently funded. They tend to be a little bit more, combative is probably the wrong word, but I mean, when I was on a particular board many years ago, we used to call those meetings Fight Club, and what happens in Fight Club stays in Fight Club, and we would leave on a good positive note. The CEO would always say, I really appreciate everyone's honesty here. But you don't always get that on the larger boards. On the larger boards, they tend to be, or larger company boards, they tend to be very formal and compliant, and sometimes they even too formal, in my opinion, where they ask a question of the chair. Would the chair allow me to ask this question? Whereas in smaller organizations, it's much more people just thumping their fist or actually coming up with great ideas,
Absolutely. And I suppose it's the absolute opposite of what you and your research and your work has endorsed, the kind of the breaking down of hierarchies in order to, empower people to bring out the best for your organization.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky enough to work with an organization that's big in inclusion and diversity. And even I have to learn that it's not just male, female. There's a lot more to this in terms of how you make up your organization, never mind so your board. And there's a long, long way to go. We're just nowhere near where we need to be in organizations. And sometimes it comes down to the culture itself in a company where there's a fear factor and people can't speak up. So having an environment where you can actually talk and challenge is very important. But in some big companies, it's very rare.
You mentioned startups there, and one of the reasons I'm absolutely thrilled to have you speaking on this topic is that not only are you a CXO advisor for the big, companies that I outlined in your intro, but you've also worked with startups, which I think is fascinating because you're able to provide that perspective for the listener on the boards at both levels, on both sides of the coin. So I'm really keen to know, is there a major difference in the board setup between, say, a multinational corporation and a startup organization?
Quite often there isn't a change at all. I mean, they're very similar, and that's because the startup or a pre-funded or just funded organization, the board members are investors, and they're very much, like they want success because they want to see a return on their investment. So, and they tend to be senior people themselves. Maybe they are angel investors or people that have been successful in their own careers, using their own money to drive forward a smaller organization. So they're similar from that perspective. And I think both boards want to see, year on year returns, and they want to see success, etc. So they're very similar in that respect. I find that it's just the only difference might be in the kind of smaller organization startup, they would be actually using their own money, which is quite something.
Right. So the epitome of vested interest.
Yes, very much so.
So how then did the startups achieve such innovative, I suppose, progression? How are they so innovative by nature, by DNA, if that's kind of the board level makeup, I suppose?
I think it's because in those organizations tends to have, a entrepreneur or a number of entrepreneurs that are, have got the great idea, and they've got people, believing in them and believing in that particular initiative or idea. But what's fascinating is when an organization realizes that original idea is not working, and they pivot quickly into something else, and the board goes with it. And maybe an example that would be like Slack with their messaging platform. Originally, it was targeted at gamers, and gamers would use it to be able to resume their conversations when they came back online. But it just really wasn't getting much traction. It's a great idea, but when they moved towards making this for larger businesses and actually helping organizations to communicate, then they became successful. And so it was a case of, they pivot quickly, I guess is the best way to say that. They're willing to embrace innovation, and bigger companies don't. They're kind of milking their current business model for everything they can get.
Right. Yeah. Do you think that comes down to, I suppose, the size of the organization and just, pivoting a smaller startup that's already agile in its nature is a lot easier, I suppose, done than in a large organization where you'll have a lot of red tape and boundaries?
Yeah, I think that particularly comes into play when the company becomes public and they can't change that easily, and therefore the original founders get fed up, go off and create another new startup, because that's what they like. They come from the startup culture, less formal, and the ability to change their minds when they want to. And you might see something slightly in between the lines. You see a little bit of that happening with Facebook trying to change their model away from what they're doing right now, or to actually seeing that's actually dwindling a bit and moving much more into a metaverse. That's unusual to see that. I mean, you can't quite see a bank deciding, right, let's go for, the true online digital nomads. They haven't got I think, the bravery sometimes to do it.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It has been a seismic shift, and, I suppose time will tell whether it's all fanfare. But I definitely know even in the marketing world, it's causing a huge stir, and we're all chasing our tails trying to find out as much as we need to know about buying virtual billboards and Piccadilly Circus. So there's lots of exciting stuff coming that way. But it's really interesting, I suppose, for the listener to kind of understand the differences and the nuances there. So in your experience then, Fin, how can someone work on garnering and achieving greater board level support for not only their IT strategies, but also their innovations, which sometimes people, they follow strategies, but they actually don't appropriate any budget or resources towards it.
Yeah, what's happened to me a couple of times where I've got into a board or an executive team with a fantastic idea and saying, like, we're going to do X, Y, Z, and please back me, and I need 5 million or I need 10 million. And you could hear crickets, like people are not so keen to give you that kind of investment. And what I've found, and maybe I'm giving away too much here from what I do in my own career now, is convince senior management teams to take an incremental approach. So ask for funding to take me to a particular point that I can prove in a short period of time that I can deliver something of value, and then go for another incremental chunk and another one and another one. And you find that leadership teams will give you as much money as you need if the first steps actually prove that you can actually deliver the bigger picture. But when you go in looking for something massive with very nebulous benefits, it's very difficult to get that investment.
And that leads me on nicely, actually, to the next question I had for you, because when we were preparing for this podcast, I jumped in at this point and I said, like a pilot, like do it by proving yourself with a pilot. And you actually said that you don't like the term pilot. Can you explain to our listeners why so?
I find that pilots and proof of concept and minimal viable products, like MVP, tend to be cut down versions of solutions. And I think they're a bit of a waste, actually. I think, in fact, sometimes to get that investment, that incremental investment, you don't actually need to go towards building anything. I mean, it's actually doing much more research or doing much more analysis of a particular solution and in-depth proving that something will work rather than actually having to build something to start with. So I find those things to be a little bit a bit of a waste of time. And I also think that leaders feel that once they put their foot in the water, as far as a pilot's concerned, they're being goaded into delivering it, the whole thing. So that's why I tend to sort of try to avoid it, because I think even CEOs are a bit suspicious of them.
Right. So it's almost like proving the customer need nearly before jumping into actually building anything.
Yeah, or proving that you have done the analysis and that you've got reference points, you've got examples, you've got people in the same world as you doing the same thing who have done it. But sometimes you have to put your career on the line and say, back me or sack me. And
wow.
That also, I've done that a couple of times. So,
how's that worked out for you?
Well, it worked out quite well, luckily. But I think if you really believe in something and you say that, then they believe that you can do it. So, and people don't take. I learned that when I worked in the US. A colleague of mine was fired, the head of marketing, and I said, I'm really sorry. He said, no, I took a risk and it didn't work out, and therefore, in my next job, I'll tell them I took a risk, and at some point I will be successful. And I couldn't believe their attitude is completely different, so.
It is, and it's admirable, because sometimes it's easier to, sit back and do things as you've always done them and, stick to the playbook. And it's, I suppose, the magic happens is when you take those risks, Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm not sure, you probably are aware of this, but before Dropbox was ever Dropbox, they created a video of what that product could do, and they put it out into the ether, and it went completely viral, showing how people could drag and drop and save their images. And it was actually on the back of that video going viral that they got the funding to create Dropbox, which is now, pretty much everyone on the planet knows what it is. Yep. So I just thought that actually complemented what you were saying a little bit, and it crosses with marketing a lot, because with marketing you're always looking at the customer is at the center of everything you do. And I remember when we were in university, there was this flower company, and they spent a huge portion of their budget just setting up SEO ads and trying to guess what the customer would be searching for. And then they actually built their products off the back of the results of those ads, which was a risky business. And, they ended up having ads bringing people to, coming soon pages. But I thought it was a really innovative way of, weeding out, I suppose, the ideas that aren't viable,
Correct.
So.
Right. And that's exactly what I did with a company in New York. That's why I don't like pilots and proof of concepts. I think they take you a little bit too far, and maybe they get you too much towards a final solution. So with a company, as I say, in the US, they had a product that was very, very profitable, but they didn't know whether certain markets would go for it. So we did exactly that. As you mentioned, we built a web page, we put the product on the web page, and we just got them to have an email sign-up box coming soon. And once they had 5,000 requests in a day, they realized this is going to be successful. So they went ahead and built out more on the product, and it became very successful for them. But a lot of companies do that. They just do this test the market, before diving in.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. So coming back, I suppose, to IT representatives at board level, and I suppose IT decision making within organizations. So I'm taking, for example, in this instance, a large organization. What does the role of their partners play in making not only their department a success, but also that person at board level, in your experience?
But the thing is, as a good leader, you have to realize your weaknesses and sometimes, or the gaps in your team. And trying to fill those gaps quickly is difficult. So having partners that can provide you with organizational kind of burst capacity to get something done, and a model whereby they help train your people as well is really important. And I find that strangely enough, as you probably see in a lot of reports, the board members tend to trust the third parties more than the people that are in their organization. And I don't know why that is, but because I guess those third parties, that's their business. Therefore, they are in existence because they do that. And poor old head of IT or CIO, CTO, when the video conference goes down, it's always their fault, right? That's the one. They don't see you as a senior business leader. They see you as the person that looks after the infrastructure. So it's kind of proving that you can surround yourself with capabilities and bring that to move your organization quickly. And that's the benefit from my perspective.
Brilliant. Yeah. It's also that idea, I suppose, of outsourcing some of the risk, isn't it? Especially with the talent market the way it is today, it's quite a big risk actually to hold all of that critical functionality within your organization, in my view. And this is just from kind of conversations that I've had is because, things are changing so quickly. And the thing, I suppose the one positive thing as well that a vendor offers you is they give you a service, not people. So you do tend to, like you say, move more rapidly on the back of that.
Yeah, well, I'm also working with another organization in Toronto right now, and we call it co-sourcing. So it's not to use the word vendor. It kind of feels like a little bit, beneath you. Yeah, it is. Yeah. So they have strategic partnerships with two large organizations. One looks after their legacy world, which is going away, but the other one is firmly a part of a co-creation of new capability in a transformation. And that's where I came up with co-sourcing. I'm sure other people have used that expression, but the idea being that you don't have all the answers and that you can rely upon somebody and not have a firm, like punitive contract, a contract where it's more collaborative. And when you've got a good relationship with a partner, or even if it's an outside partner or a vendor, it can be quite powerful. As long as there's trust between both groups. If it becomes, the master and slave, that's why I didn't like the expression so much, because therefore it implies that there's some sort of, well, if you don't do this by this date, then you're going to be penalized. Look how great I am, and that's not a good relationship.
No, it doesn't do anything for the quality really of the outputs then,
Yeah.
Coming back to IT representation on boards, do you think that communication is a big, I suppose, reason for a lack of endorsement or understanding of the IT departments?
One thing that I learned very early in my career, the biggest skill you can learn as a leader, whether it be IT or not, is presentation skills, and to be able to really clearly articulate what it is you're trying to achieve and what your team does and how you add value to the organization. And being able to communicate powerfully to that group is important. I remember doing one presentation to a large board where I didn't use any bullet points whatsoever. I was told to use bullet points and provide my presentation ahead of the meeting. I refused to do it. And I did a presentation all in images, which is my style. And the board said, that's the best thing I've ever seen. And the CEO stepped down, had to apologize afterwards. But I was kind of saying that's the way I communicate. I communicate with images, and I cannot communicate with bullet points. I think it's one of those things that you find that you can learn. You don't have to be natural. You can learn. Mm-hmm. And then using the same skill to communicate with your team, so they're behind you, that they support you.
Absolutely. And I suppose just like practically, it's hard for someone to absorb a presentation in front of them or on the screen as well as read at the same time. It does take something from the experience, I would argue as well. Whereas, if you just pick one, you either give them a detailed document or you present them and walk them through your thinking, I think it tends to be a lot more powerful.
Yeah, I think one piece of advice I was given by a CEO was you need to be big picture, but also in the detail. So you have to be able to do both. You can't be one or the other. And I'm not very good at the detail. In fact, if anyone's listening to this that worked with me in the past knows that I'm absolutely rubbish at budgets and finance, and I glaze over any information that's regarding net present value or something that's going out into the future. So, but I always have somebody to help me do that. So like have on my team a financial expert who I trust, and therefore I don't have to do it myself because I'm rubbish at it.
Yeah, focus on your strengths, isn't that what they say?
That's what they say.
And it's worked out for you, Fin.
Well, so far.
Oh, lovely. Well, so just to bring it to the summary now. So how we are going to wrap up each of these podcasts is just to bring it back to, I suppose, the core objective, which is for the listener to gain practical insights. So we like to finish this episode by asking you, if I'm listening to this podcast today, regardless of my rank in an organization, what are the top tips that you'd offer me that I could implement into my way of working tomorrow, that would help me master this success factor for business transformation?
Okay. I mean, there are a number of things you can do. I think personally, I prefer to make sure that as a senior technologist, I can articulate benefits to the business side of the house, but also the benefits that the business are looking to the rest of my team. So it's being that kind of, like you mentioned before, the communication is key. Communication to the people that are senior to you and the people that work with you is really important. I think you also have to prove your capabilities. You might think that you've obviously got these skills, etc., but people may not know that you've got those skills. And so I think when people are looking to invest in you, they need to know that you've got those skills. In fact, many boards have asked me, how do you keep your skills sharp? How do you know what you're talking about? Where do you get your information from? And sometimes you need to prove that. I think you should also avoid using any jargon whatsoever. This switches off senior leaders completely. They kind of go, oh gosh, what the hell is he talking about, or her? So therefore I would actually try and make sure that you don't use that. And I think, as we mentioned earlier on, this kind of comes back to know your weaknesses, but it's really know your partners. How can you share and fill in the gaps in your team to actually deliver a whole business transformation, and not just do it all yourself, because they probably won't trust you.
Brilliant. Great. Fin, that wraps us up today. I just want to say a big thank you for taking the time out to talk to us at Expleo. We really appreciate your time, and it was just, I could have talked to you all day. It was so valuable. I think that the listeners will really gain a lot from what you've shared with us today. So I extend a massive thank you for attending.
Thank you so much.
So that's it for episode 2. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation with Fin and found it interesting and motivational. Thank you for tuning in to Expleo Explorers. You'll find the Business Transformation Index on our website, along with the other podcasts at expleo.com/podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Join in the conversation online. You can just use the hashtag Expleo Explorers on social media. So next up, we leave the boardroom and get right into the detail, exploring our next success factor, delivering on time. And I'm delighted to say we're going to welcome Chief Information Officer at AIR, Brian Chapman, to discuss this in greater detail. Delivering on time is a really interesting topic. Until then, I hope you have a great week.